What would happen if I told you that within you there is an unknown force that guides each of your decisions without you noticing? A silent voice that whispers in your dreams, influences your relationships, and pushes you towards certain paths, without you knowing why. That mystery, that invisible presence, is what Carl Jung called the unconscious. But what would happen if you immersed yourself in it? If you decided to listen to what it has to tell you for 30 days? That was the question I asked myself, and what I found changed my life. This is not a theoretical experiment. It's not just reading Jung's books and talking about symbols. For 30 days, I applied his most profound ideas to my own life. The shadow, archetypes, individuation, and what I discovered shook me to the core. In this video, I will take you through each phase of this journey, step by step, so you too can undertake it if you dare. As I began this experiment, my first challenge was a simple but terrifying one: observing myself. Jung said that our conscious personality is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it are repressed impulses, hidden desires, and inherited patterns that operate without us noticing. So, for the first week, my task was simply to pay attention. What thoughts were appearing out of control? What emotions were taking me by surprise? And what I found was disturbing. I realized that many of my decisions weren't really mine. Small automatisms ran my life. The way I reacted to a text message, the words I chose in a conversation, even the moments when I avoided looking in the mirror for too long. Everything was programmed by past experiences that I didn't even remember. Jung said that most of who we are is in the shadow, that part of our psyche that hides everything we don't want to admit about ourselves. And in those early days, I started seeing it. A clear example was when I found myself reacting with irritation towards someone close to me. Before, I would have thought, it bothers me because it's unbearable. But this time I asked myself, why does it really irritate me? And as I dug deeper, I realized that I actually envied their confidence. They weren't the problem. It was my shadow reflected in them. Here's a question for you. Have you ever been really bothered by someone for no apparent reason? What if that person is showing something that you deny about yourself? If this sounds interesting to you, leave me a comment telling me if you have noticed this phenomenon in your life, because this is just the beginning. The second step in my experiment was to listen to what Jung called the messages of the psyche, dreams. For 30 days, I wrote down every dream I remembered. It didn't matter if they seemed absurd or incoherent. I wrote them down when I woke up. And what I discovered was shocking. My dreams had a pattern. Recurring figures appeared. An old woman with dark eyes, a bridge that never ended, a storm on the horizon. Jung said that in dreams, archetypes manifest, those universal figures that represent parts of ourselves. And when I started to analyze them, I saw something clear. My unconscious was trying to tell me something. One of the most disturbing dreams was this. I dreamed that I was walking through an endless hallway full of closed doors. I felt like something was chasing me, but when I dared to look back, there was nothing. Just the feeling that something was there. When I researched more about these types of dreams, I discovered that many people have had similar dreams when they are on the verge of a major change in their life. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. That is, my unconscious was showing me that there was something in me that I had to face, something that I was avoiding seeing. Has something similar happened to you? Any dreams that you feel have a deeper meaning? Leave it to me in the comments, because understanding dreams is key to understanding ourselves. As I progressed through the experiment, something started to happen. My conscious mind was resisting. Didn't want to continue exploring. There were days when I felt restless for no reason, as if my own unconscious was telling me, don't continue. But Jung warned about this. He said that when you get too close to the truth about yourself, the ego fights back. It wants to maintain its control. And this is where many people abandon the individuation process, because it's not comfortable. But I decided to move on. And what I found in the next few days was even more shocking. If you have liked it so far, don't forget to like and subscribe so that more people discover these topics. When I started this experiment, I thought I would just explore my mind and make some interesting discoveries, but I didn't expect what would come next. You see, when you dare to look inside yourself, to dig deep into your psyche, something begins to happen. Something uncomfortable, but inevitable. You come face to face with your shadow. Carl Jung said that the shadow is everything we have repressed and denied about ourselves. It's not just the bad stuff like anger or envy, but also talents and desires that we've buried because at some point we thought they weren't right. But what happens when that shadow comes to light? I discovered it in the second week of my experiment, and it was terrifying. One of the most powerful exercises in this experiment was observing my reactions to others. Jung said that what irritates us in others is a reflection of something we deny in ourselves. So I decided to put it to the test. Every time someone bothered me, instead of blaming them, I asked myself, what part of me is being reflected in that person? One day, I realized that I was very uncomfortable with a person who spoke too confidently. They seemed arrogant to me. But then I asked myself, is it really arrogance? Or is it that deep down, I would like to express myself with such confidence? And there I understood it. It wasn't them who were bothering me. It was me, projecting my own insecurity onto them. Another example was with someone who seemed too relaxed, unconcerned about the future. My first thought was, it's irresponsible. But when I examined my reaction, I saw that what I was really feeling was envy. Envy of their ability to let go, to not obsess over every detail like me. So I asked myself, how many times do we blame others for something that is actually within us? If something similar has happened to you, leave a comment with the phrase, I am discovering my shadow, and tell me what you have noticed in yourself. As the experiment progressed, my dreams began to become darker. I dreamed of an endless hallway, full of closed doors. I dreamed of a hooded figure watching me from a distance. And the worst thing, I dreamed of distorted versions of myself, as if my reflection in the mirror had a life of its own. When I researched this further, I discovered that Jung warned about this phenomenon. When you approach your shadow, the ego resists. The ego wants to maintain control. It wants you to continue believing that you are just the image you show to the world. But the unconscious has other plans. I began to notice signs of resistance in my daily life. I forgot important things. I was easily distracted. I felt a strange anxiety before I sat down to write about my discoveries. That's when I understood something key. If you don't face your shadow, it will control you from the shadows. This is where many people abandon the self-knowledge process, because it gets difficult, because it hurts. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming, your true self is not a path of light and peace. It is a descent into the unknown. It's facing parts of yourself that you don't want to see. And in those days, I asked myself, am I ready to continue? Because although I was beginning to understand my hidden patterns and fears, I also felt that something deeper was waiting for me, so I decided to move forward. But I was not prepared for what I would find next. The archetypes. Invisible forces that shape our minds and our lives without us knowing it. Discovering the archetypes was like understanding that I was not alone in my mind, that universal patterns lived within me, stories that have existed in every culture, in every human being since the beginning of time. Archetypes guide us, but they also control us. If we don't know them, we live by their rules without realizing it. As I progressed in my experiment with Carl Jung's ideas, I realized something disturbing. It's not just me who rules my mind. There are invisible forces that shape the way I think, feel, and act. forces that have existed since the beginning of time. Jung called them archetypes. They are deep patterns that live in our unconscious and that, without realizing it, drive us to repeat stories, to choose certain paths, and to experience life in specific ways. Archetypes are in the movies we love, in the myths of humanity, in the figures we admire and fear, but the most shocking thing is that they are also within each of us. So I asked myself a question. Which of these archetypes govern my life without me realizing it? What I discovered completely changed the way I saw the world and myself. From a young age, we are taught that we must be heroes in our own story. We must strive, fight against obstacles, prove our worth, and achieve victory. But Jung warns us of something. The hero can also be a trap. If we live dominated by this archetype, we feel that our life only has value if we are constantly improving ourselves. We do not allow ourselves to rest or be vulnerable, and the worst part, we always need an enemy to defeat. I thought about how many times I had fallen into this trap. Was I really facing challenges because I wanted them, or because my ego needed to feel like a hero? When I asked myself this question, something inside me broke. I realized that many of my struggles weren't really necessary. They were stories that my unconscious had created to give me a sense of purpose. But what would happen if I let go of that role? Who would I be without my need to fight? Another powerful archetype that I discovered in myself was that of the sage. I have always looked for answers. I have always felt that I need to understand the truth behind everything. But Jung warns us of something. When the sage dominates your life, you can fall into analysis paralysis. If we spend too much time searching for answers, we run the risk of forgetting to live. And there, I understood something crucial. Wisdom is not accumulating knowledge. It is experiencing it. So I decided to do something different. Instead of just reading about the archetypes, I began to observe them in action in my daily life. And what I found was shocking. One of Jung's most powerful discoveries is that archetypes influence the way we relate to others. For example, the father archetype and the mother archetype are not just familiar figures. They are energies that influence how we seek protection, authority, or security in our relationships. I asked myself, what archetypes am I projecting onto the people in my life? I discovered that I often saw certain people as teachers, waiting for them to give me answers. Other times, I idealized someone as if they were a savior, thinking they had all the solutions. But the most shocking thing was realizing how many times I had assumed the victim archetype without realizing it. When we blame others for our situation, when we feel like we have no control, we are trapped in this archetype. But Jung tells us something important. We can choose which archetype to embody. We are not condemned to live a repeated history. After exploring my archetypes, I understood that there is something even bigger. The self. The self is the core of our psyche. It is the part of us that is not trapped in the archetypes, but observes them. Jung said that the purpose of life is to integrate all our parts and become complete beings. This process is called individuation. And in my experiment, I started to notice something incredible. The more aware I became of my archetypes, the freer I felt. I no longer reacted the same way to people. I no longer felt trapped in the same old patterns. And most importantly, I began to see others with new eyes. Because when you understand that we are all influenced by invisible forces, you stop judging. You stop seeing people as good or bad and start seeing them for what they really are. Human beings on their own journey of self-knowledge. And then I knew that my experiment was not over. There was something else I needed to explore. Something even deeper, the collective unconscious and its influence on our lives. Throughout this experiment, I have explored my mind in ways I never imagined. I have faced my shadow, discovered the archetypes that govern my life, and understood that I am not just an isolated individual, but now an even deeper question arises. Are we really separate, or is there something that connects us on a level beyond consciousness? Carl Jung had a revolutionary theory. the collective unconscious. He believed that our minds are not only a product of our personal history, but that we also share a deeper level of psyche with all of humanity. It is as if we are connected to an invisible network, an ancestral memory full of symbols, myths, and patterns that have existed since the dawn of humanity. But what does that mean for us? What I discovered changed my way of seeing reality. Jung discovered that, regardless of culture or time, humans have created the same symbols over and over again. The sun, the moon, the tree of life, the snake, the labyrinth. All of them appear in religions, mythologies, and dreams of people who have never had contact with each other. Why? Because these symbols do not come from the outside world. They emerge from the collective unconscious. They are expressions of something deeper, something we carry within us without realizing it. This made me think about my own dreams. I decided to analyze them through this new lens, and that's when I noticed something amazing. There were recurring symbols that I didn't understand before, but that made sense now. A river, which Jung described as the current of life. A bridge, which symbolizes the transition between states of consciousness. A mysterious guide, who represented the archetype of the wise elder. When I began to interpret my dreams through the collective unconscious, I discovered messages that my conscious mind could not see. And this led me to the next question. If the symbols of the collective unconscious are in all of us, then how do they affect our lives without us noticing? Since ancient times, humanity has told the same stories under different names. The hero who faces trials and grows. The battle between light and darkness. The cycle of death and rebirth. These stories are not just entertainment. They are narratives that emerge from the depths of the human psyche. And the most shocking thing, we also live these stories in our daily lives. Love relationships follow mythological patterns. Personal crises reflect heroes' journeys. Moments of transformation are small symbolic deaths. When I understood this, I began to see my life with different eyes. Every difficult experience I had faced wasn't just a problem. It was part of an archetypal journey, a path of evolution that we all follow, whether we want to or not. This is where everything becomes even more mysterious. Jung not only believed that the collective unconscious influences us, he also thought that our individual actions can change it. What we do and think doesn't just affect us. It also leaves a mark on the collective psyche. Scientists have found something surprising. When enough people learn something new, other people can begin to pick up that knowledge without having been taught directly. It is as if there is a network that connects our minds. And this made me think, if each of us works on our own individuation, on our own self-knowledge, is it possible that little by little, we are transforming the consciousness of humanity? This idea took my breath away, because it meant that every step we take in our own growth not only benefits us, it also helps others awaken, even if they don't consciously know it. The big question: what else is there in the collective unconscious? When Jung explored the depths of the unconscious, he found something even more enigmatic. Images and knowledge that did not seem to come only from the human mind. Some people have dreamed of symbols and concepts that they had never learned. Others have experienced visions of cultures they never studied. This brings us to a final question, one that Jung never fully answered. Is the collective unconscious just a reflection of the human mind? Or is it something more? Could it be a deeper channel of information, older than humanity itself? If this is true, it means that the knowledge we seek is not only in books or theories, it is within us, waiting to be discovered. And here, in the last days of my experiment, I realized something fundamental. It's not just about understanding our psyche. I have reached the end of my 30-day experiment with Carl Jung, a month submerged in the unconscious, a month facing my shadow, a month deciphering the archetypes that guide my life. But there was one last question I couldn't ignore. What does it really mean to wake up? During this time, I felt like something in me was changing. My dreams became more intense. The coincidences were too precise to ignore. The people around me seemed to act differently towards me. Was it possible that by transforming my mind, I was also altering my reality? Carl Jung had an answer for this. And this is where everything learned makes sense. Because the journey of individuation is not just an internal process. It is the point at which psyche and reality intersect. But before we explain it, let's go back to a key concept. Jung spoke of a higher psychological goal. Something beyond the ego, beyond the shadow, beyond archetypes, the self. The self is the totality of what we are. It is the union between our conscious and unconscious part. It is the center of our psyche, the deepest core of our identity. But the most shocking thing is that the self does not only belong to us. Jung suspected that the self is not just individual, but something greater, something that connects all humanity. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when a person approaches the self, something changes in their perception of the world. Reality begins to respond in unexpected ways, and this is where Jung's most mysterious concept arises. Jung coined a term to describe those coincidences that seem too significant to be chance. Synchronicity occurs when an external event matches an internal state so precisely that it seems impossible for it to be just chance. Example, you think about an old friend and suddenly they write to you. You're looking for an answer, and it appears in a random conversation. You feel lost, and just at that moment you find a book with the perfect message. Jung believed that synchronicity was not just coincidence. It was the manifestation of the connection between our psyche and the external world. When I reached day 30 of my experiment, I realized something. The more aware I became of my unconscious, the more synchronicities began to occur. It was as if reality were rearranging itself around me. But was it just my perception? Or was something else going on? This was the biggest discovery of my experiment. External reality is not something separate from us. It is a reflection of what we carry inside. When we feel in chaos, the world seems chaotic. When we face our shadow, the people around us react differently. When we integrate our unconscious, life seems to become more fluid. Jung explained it with a powerful phrase. Until the unconscious becomes conscious, the subconscious will direct your life, and you will call it destiny. What if everything we call destiny is just our psyche projecting itself into reality? This thought shocked me, because it meant that my way of seeing the world was not simply passive perception, it was an active creation. If this is true, then each internal transformation doesn't just change us. It also changes the world. After 30 days exploring my unconscious with the guidance of Carl Jung, this is what I learned. We are not just our ego. Our shadow holds the keys to our transformation. Archetypes guide us on our journey. The collective unconscious connects us all. Synchronicity shows us that reality and mind are intertwined. But the most important thing is that we are responsible for our own evolution. The world we experience outside is a reflection of what we carry inside. If we want to change our reality, we must first change our psyche. Like, subscribe, and activate the campaign, because in the next videos we will continue exploring the mysteries of the psyche, the unconscious, and true personal transformation. See you on the next trip.